Okay, thanks everybody for joining. This is the Accelatis Essentials series of webinars. This week we're going to go over creating KPIs, and just to remind everybody about this series, basically we want to keep this down to about a 15-minute window. We want it short and sweet, just to focus on very specific areas so that you can either refresh your knowledge, or if you're new to it, you can learn how to do it. So again, we're going to keep it super short. Although we're not going to have a Q&A session afterward, you are always welcome to email any questions at any time, and of course we'd help you out there. So today we're going over creating KPIs. There are a number of KPIs that are available to you. KPIs are key performance indicators. And as far as the Accelatis product goes, we can collect information on many different areas to help you understand your system. The types of KPIs that we have available depend on the plugin that you have installed on your system. So we have Accelatis KPIs, which are fairly specific to Accelatis tracking. We have Essbase, FDM, generic log reader, HFM, shared services, Java KPIs, database KPIs, and again, depending on what KPI it is, there are a number of things that we can expose with those KPIs. So again, if you go into your system as we do this and you take a look, you can see what you have available for your KPIs. The uses for KPIs, so why would you even put a KPI in place? Probably the top reason why you want to do this is you want to be alerted based on limits, high, low limits. If a particular counter, say percentage of free disk space, goes below a certain number, you want to have an alert sent on that. So that's probably the primary use of KPIs. But also other ways that you can use KPIs, you can use it for historical trending and help understand what sort of stresses are put on your servers over time. Could be over a week, could be over a month, could be over 6 months. You can also create performance graphs with KPIs. So in other words, you can take counters of your system, you can incorporate them into a graph, and maybe you want those sent in a report on a weekly basis or something like that. So that's another use for KPIs. You can use KPIs for these same types of graphs in dashboard widgets. So if you are using the dashboarding function of the UI, you can add KPIs, add them to performance graphs, and now you can see them on your dashboards. You can run an automation based on a KPI threshold. Let's say, for instance, you have a process that runs and you are monitoring the memory that process is consuming. Well, you can now run an automation based on the amount. If it goes over a gig, maybe you want to restart a service, maybe you want to do something else. So you can do that with a KPI as well. And then the last thing I have in the list for uses would be troubleshooting. The thing to note about troubleshooting is that not all KPIs are added automatically. You have to go in and you have to pick which KPIs you want us to monitor. So in the case of troubleshooting, you might start off with a very broad range, say CPU on the server, and you might see that CPU is high. In which case, if you're working on it for troubleshooting, you might want to dig in a little bit. You might want to say, well, now even though the CPU on the entire system is high, let me go in and see how high the CPU usage is for my processes, right? So for troubleshooting, you can dig in a little bit. You can add some KPIs if it's something that you want to explore. But again, you can look at that historical data, and that will help you with the troubleshooting process using KPIs as well. So for KPIs, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my sandbox environment, and I'm going to show you how to add them now. I'm already in my client. This happens to be a 4.0 client. If you are using 3.5, it's going to be slightly different. You'll see KPIs over here on the top left section. But again, as far as the functionality and the way that the module looks, we have not changed very much. So we're going to start off with just the main view of the module. So what you see here is a list of all of your KPIs. It's very important to note that there is a column that's labeled enabled. Now this column does not mean that the KPI is enabled. What this column means is that the KPI is alert enabled. So the top bunch that I have here, I have set up a high or low threshold to be alerted on. And again, if those limits are met one way or the other, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get an alert. These other ones, even though it says no in the enabled column, these KPIs are collecting data. Okay, if they are in this screen, they are collecting data. It's adding data to your database. From this screen, if you go ahead and click on any of these KPIs, what you see down below is an automatic two-hour window that's going to help you understand what this thing did over the last couple of hours. I tried to keep my sandbox environment running so that this demonstration, has some data in it. But as you can see, depending on what I click, fairly quick to come up, and I get a nice little line of what's been going on. Now, if I were to do the same thing with an alert-enabled KPI, like I have up here, what I now see is a 2-hour graph, but I also see my limits here. In this case, if I open up this window, you can see that I have this triggering if it's below a particular threshold. So what you see in the graph is a low severity, which I told it if it's under 5,000 to go ahead and trigger a low severity alert. But if it's under 2,000, I want a high severity alert, which is why you see this darker orange color here. So again, it's very quick. I don't really have to read it. I know the numbers are up here, but in the graph itself, I can see these limits. I could see that those are below the threshold. I could see this one is set above the threshold. And again, as I'm looking at my data, this will help me understand either why I got an alert or the trend for the last couple of hours of what happened. You'll also see under the status column that the icon will change. I've got it set up so that I've got these 3 KPIs are well within the limits that I set. I've got this one KPI that is in a low alert state, so you can see the blue icon there. And then this one is in a high threshold state, which is why you see the red X there. Okay. Also, I just want to point out that with the KPIs that I have enabled for alerts, I get a little extra information over here on the left-hand side. What I see is my most recent trigger time, which means this is the last time that it alerted. In this case, I've got these KPIs that are constantly triggering, but I've got this one KPI down here that triggered early this morning, but that was the last time it triggered. I also see my value time, so this is the last check that it did. In my case, it was at 11:50, and I could see what the value was, so I can get kind of a real-time feel for what this KPI looks like at the moment. And again, if you've got something that's in a trigger state or an alert state, you can very quickly see what it was and why it's in that state. So let's talk about creating KPIs. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come to the top of the screen, and there's an icon that if you roll over, it's KPIs Manager. It looks like a little graph. We're going to go ahead and click that. Okay. Now when we pull the screen up, the way that we organize the servers in an Accelatis environment is through group. So even though my sandbox environment only has one server, my one server is in a group called core. Okay? Every time we assign a KPI, we assign it to the entire group. So if I had a group of, say, 3 HFM servers, and they are all in the same group called HFM, right here I would see HFM drop down, and then it would list everything that I have underneath it as far as KPIs go that are assigned to that group. Okay, I pick the group that I want, and I click the little green plus sign at the top. Okay, that brings up this window. And again, I want to note I've got one server in my sandbox environment. If you had 3 HFM servers in your group, this drop-down box would actually show you those 3 servers. Okay, and you're going to pick one of them, and you're going to click the update button. Now what that does is it's going to reach out to the server. It's going to gather up the information that it needs to build what KPIs are available. Is it a Windows box? Is it a Linux box? Does it have the HFM plugin? All those things are built when you click that update button. And again, in the 3.5 version, you might see something a little bit different than this, but it works generally the same, where you're going to have a number of high-level KPIs to pick from. In this case, you can see I start right off with the Accelatis KPIs. And depending on what Accelatis has seen me do, it's going to build a list of things that I can report on. I can report the number of activities in an hour, the number of activities in an hour per server, the total number of activities, performance table size, which is going to be in the database. So there's a number of things that I can pick from on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, I can get even more specific. I don't just have to track the total number of activities for everything. I can track the total number of activities for this particular instance, say HFM forms open, workspace core logon. So depending on what I pick here, it's going to do whatever I tell it. These are going to change slightly depending on what you pick, right? So for the Accelatis counters, the instance is some activity that it has picked out. If I drop down to S-base counters, this changes. Now these are the S-base applications that I have configured Accelatis to monitor. So because I've done that, I now get a number of KPIs that are exposed just from the S-base plugin, but now these are applied to the applications that I have configured us to look at. And again, this is true for all of these EPM type counters. HFM is the same way. Whatever HFM application that I have gone through and configured and said, now I want Accelatis to monitor this application, that now opens it up for all of these KPIs to be exposed. So again, this is all stuff that Accelatis has built and exposed for you. If you click on Windows or Linux, these are OS-specific KPIs. The Windows KPIs, some people get really dizzy looking at this list. It really is the list that's available to you in Performance Monitor. So again, we're not creating these things. We're just sort of exposing them in our interface so that you can incorporate them into your graphs, into your dashboards, into your troubleshooting. And again, anything that Windows can report to you, we can also pull in here and report as well. So depending on what you want to see, you would pick whatever it is. In this case, why don't we go ahead and pick memory, and I'll just pick available bytes, and this will be our little test here. So I click the Add button, and it adds it into the background, and I'll close it, even though you might not have seen it. All the way at the bottom of my list here, I have my new counter, which is Windows memory available bytes. And again, it's going to apply this to every server in the core group. So once I have it there, I can click OK. And once I click OK, that KPI is now set to collect data. Okay, it's in my list. It's going to collect data every couple of minutes. It's going to store it in the database. I can use it to create any of those things that I said before. But what if I want to do more with this KPI? Well, once you're in this KPI module screen and you can see your KPI here, all you need to do is double-click it. And by double-clicking it, it will bring up the configuration panel. Now, this little enabled column that I talked about before, that's exactly what this checkbox is. Is it alert enabled? So once I select it, now I can alert based on above, below, any number of directions of the value. But in this case, this is available memory byte. And if it goes below a certain number, maybe I want to know about it. Okay? So I'm going to tell it if it drops below 2,000, maybe it's a low severity, right? Severity 5, which doesn't send an email. It doesn't do much of anything except pop a note into the UI here. But if this thing goes below 1,000 megabytes, now I want to know. I want to make it a severity 1, which I know means an email is going to go out, and maybe even I want to run some job. So even from here, I can pick any number of automations that I have already set up in my automation module to run in case it reaches this level. So once I set all these things up, if it hits that level, it is going to send me an alert. I can further modify what happens here by using a custom trigger criteria. So maybe if it goes below these values once, it's okay. But you know what? If it does this for for say 5 times in a row, then I want to know about it. So I can set my consecutive samples up to any number, in this case say 5, and that way I know if it happens 5 times in a row, then I'm going to get the alert, because I don't care if it happens once. Probably not, not that big of a deal. And you could set this up for either consecutive samples or how much time. So if the memory is in that state for 15 minutes, I want to know about it. So you set all your things up here, click OK. You'll notice this box always comes up. It says apply threshold settings to all checked KPIs. I'm in the habit of always picking no. And the only reason why I'm doing that, it'll always update this one. But if I put some check marks against a bunch of them, right, and then I come in and I do something, let's say I'm going to say above the threshold, right? And these numbers really don't mean much of anything, but let's say I do that, and then it says apply it to all checked KPIs. So if I hit yes, it's actually going to apply those threshold settings to everything. Now that's good if you've got a high number of KPIs that you're trying to set at the same time. But again, unless you're specifically doing that, you probably don't want to. But once I click OK, then I'm there. My changes are in place. The next time this KPI runs, if it hits any of these thresholds, it is going to go ahead and it is going to alert me. Okay, so that's as easy as it is for adding KPIs and creating KPIs. On that same note, if you wanted to delete a KPI, you can come back to this screen, put a check mark next to the one you don't want, hit the little red circle, and that's it. Your KPI is now gone and the data behind it is gone. So that's really creating a KPI and adding a KPI. I wanted to show you a quick tip. This actually I got off of the TechNet site on Microsoft, and it just basically talks about 4 phases of a tuning cycle, and you repeat it until you achieve the performance goals that you want. So really, you collect the data, which is us collecting the KPIs, you analyze it. Maybe you're looking at some graphs. You might want to change your configuration to test a few things out, and then you go back and you collect again, and you just repeat this cycle. Again, KPIs are something that you can use over and over and over again to understand your system, to get it to perform better, or to to do any number of things. But again, this tuning cycle is something that always runs. So you should always have this in mind when you're thinking about KPIs and the things that you can do with it. And that's pretty much it for KPIs, guys. The next session, which is going to be next week, with my lovely slide, Accelatis repository module. What it is, where it comes from, how to navigate it. I've gotten a lot of questions as far as the repository module and what's inside of it. What are all these things? And so next week we're going to go over what's in there and how to use that data to get what you need. Again, thanks everybody for attending. Hopefully I kept it short enough for you. Always welcome emails. If you want to email the general support mailbox, it's support@accelatis.com. My name's Chuck Chakowski. Again, thanks everybody for joining, and hopefully I'll see you next week.